December 14, 1944. A farmhouse outside Bastogne, Belgium. Private First Class Leonard Marsh sits on a wooden crate in the cellar, hands trembling, watching his breath fog in the frozen air. 22 years old, third week in combat. The 101st Airborne Division is surrounded. German forces are closing in, and Marsh has just been told he's being recommended for a Bronze Star. He doesn't want it. The citation describes what happened 3 days earlier on a patrol near Noville, how Marsh pulled 2 wounded soldiers from a burning half-track while under machine gun fire, how he carried them both to safety across 200 yards of open ground, how he saved their lives while exposing himself to enemy fire. The company commander, Captain Richard Stone, wrote the recommendation personally, said Marsh displayed extraordinary valor, said his actions were heroic, said he deserved recognition. Marsh remembers the event differently. He remembers panic, the smell of diesel fuel mixing with burning flesh, the screaming, the way his legs wouldn't stop moving even when his mind told him to stop. The 2 soldiers weren't saved through courage, they were saved through terror. Because when that half-track exploded and Marsh saw the flames, his first instinct wasn't to help, it was to run away. He took 3 steps in the opposite direction before something deeper than training took over. Not heroism, not valor, just the inability to leave men burning alive. He grabbed the first soldier without thinking, dragged him through snow already stained red. The machine gun fire came from somewhere to the left. Bullets kicked up frozen earth. Marsh wasn't dodging them. He wasn't charging forward with determination. He was simply pulling dead weight, one hand after another, while every muscle in his body screamed to let go. The second soldier took longer. He was trapped under part of the vehicle. Marsh had to pry twisted metal away with his bare hands. The heat seared his palms. He could smell his own skin burning. But the screaming was worse than the pain, so he pulled harder until the metal gave way and the soldier came free. When he finally reached cover behind a stone wall, both soldiers alive and breathing, Marsh vomited into the snow. His hands shook so badly he couldn't hold his rifle. Another soldier, Corporal James Bennett, slapped him on the back and said, "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Marsh knew it wasn't bravery. It was something else entirely, something he couldn't name. Now, 3 days later, Captain Stone wants to pin a medal on his chest, wants to call him a hero in front of the entire company, wants to use his actions as an example of the division's fighting spirit. The paperwork is already filed. The ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Marsh looks at his hands. The burns are healing, pink new skin showing through the bandages. He flexes his fingers slowly. They still work. Still capable of pulling triggers, throwing grenades, stabbing with bayonets, still capable of the violence required to survive in this war. But he doesn't feel like a soldier anymore. He feels like someone playing the role of a soldier, going through the motions he's been trained to perform, while some other part of him watches from a distance, wondering how long the performance can continue. The cellar is crowded with other men from his platoon. They're cleaning weapons, writing letters home, trying to stay warm. Nobody talks much. The Germans have the town surrounded. Artillery shells fall irregularly, shaking dust from the ceiling beams. Supplies are running low. Ammunition, medical supplies, food. The 101st was supposed to hold Bastogne for 48 hours until reinforcements arrived. It's been 8 days. No reinforcements, no resupply, no orders except to hold the line. General Anthony McAuliffe, the acting division commander, sent back one word when the Germans demanded surrender: nuts. Marsh respects McAuliffe. The general is staying with his men, refusing evacuation even as the situation deteriorates. That's leadership. That's what officers are supposed to do. But Marsh isn't an officer. He's a private first class who joined the army at 18 because the war seemed like the only option that mattered. He was raised in a small town in Ohio. His father worked at the steel mill. His mother cleaned houses. They were patriotic people, believed in duty and sacrifice, believed America was fighting for something worth dying for. They raised Marsh to believe the same. When Pearl Harbor happened, he was 16, too young to enlist, but he watched older boys from his neighborhood sign up and ship out. saw them come back on leave in their uniforms, telling stories about basic training and deployment, saw the way people looked at them with respect and gratitude. By 1942, Marsh couldn't wait any longer. He lied about his age and enlisted. The recruiter knew he was underage, but didn't care. The Army needed bodies. Marsh became a paratrooper because paratroopers were elite, because jumping out of airplanes seemed like the kind of things heroes did. Jump school at Fort Benning was the hardest thing he'd ever done. 5 weeks of training, running, push-ups, pull-ups, obstacle courses, learning to pack parachutes and execute proper landing techniques, learning to overcome the primal fear of jumping from aircraft in flight. The first jump was terrifying. Standing in the door of the C-47, wind tearing at his uniform, instructor shouting "Go!" and his body refusing to move. Then someone behind him pushed, and suddenly he was falling through empty air, counting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, before the canopy deployed and jerked him upward with enough force to bruise his shoulders. After that, jumping became routine. He completed all 5 qualification jumps, earned his wings, got assigned to the 506th Paratrooper Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, shipped to England in late 1943 for training before the invasion. D-Day was supposed to be his moment, the great test, the chance to prove himself in combat against the Nazi war machine. He jumped into Normandy on June 6, 1944, with 60 pounds of equipment and an M1 Garand rifle, landed in a field 3 miles from his objective, spent 2 hours moving through hedgerows trying to link up with his unit. Found them at dawn, or what was left of them. A third of the company was dead, wounded, or missing. The survivors looked exhausted and shell-shocked, but they were still fighting, still moving forward, because that's what paratroopers did. The fighting in Normandy lasted 33 days. Marsh learned quickly that war wasn't glorious. It was muddy fields and dead cows bloating in the sun. It was dysentery and trench foot. It was the sound of artillery fire that never stopped and the smell of cordite that got into your clothes and wouldn't wash out. He killed his first German soldier on the 3rd day, a young Wehrmacht private who stumbled around the corner of a destroyed farmhouse and froze when he saw Marsh standing there with his rifle raised. They looked at each other for maybe 2 seconds, long enough for Marsh to see the boy's face. Pale skin, blue eyes, 17 or 18 years old. Then Marsh pulled the trigger, and the boy fell backward into the mud and didn't move again. No dramatic death scene, no final words. Just a body that stopped being a person and became an obstacle to step over while continuing the advance. Marsh expected to feel something, pride, shame, horror, but all he felt was tired and hungry and cold. The act of killing had no weight beyond the physical mechanics of aiming and firing. It was just another task on a long list of tasks required to survive. After Normandy came Operation Martin Garden in September, another combat jump. This time into Holland. The mission was to capture bridges and open a corridor into Germany. It failed. The division took heavy casualties. Marsh's platoon was reduced to half strength. Men he'd trained with for months were suddenly gone, replaced by replacements who didn't know the terrain or the tactics and died quickly as a result. Then came Bastogne. The Germans launched a surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest in December. The 101st was rushed north to hold the critical road junction at Bastogne, while American forces regrouped. They arrived on December 19th with minimal supplies and no winter gear. The temperature was below freezing. Snow covered everything. The Germans surrounded the town on December 21st, cut off all roads, started shelling the American positions, sent infantry probes testing for weak points in the defensive line, and the 101st dug in and waited for relief that still hasn't arrived. That's when Marsh pulled those 2 soldiers from the burning half-track 3 days ago, December 11th, during a patrol that wasn't supposed to make contact with enemy forces. But the Germans were everywhere now. Every patrol made contact. Every position took fire. Now Captain Stone wants to give him a medal for it, wants to call him a hero in front of the entire company, wants to use his actions as an example of the division's fighting spirit. The paperwork is already filed. The ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Marsh looks at his hands. The burns are healing, pink new skin showing through the bandages. He flexes his fingers slowly. They still work. The ceremony takes place in the ruins of what used to be a church. German artillery destroyed the roof and most of the walls 3 days ago, but enough structure remains to provide shelter from the wind. Captain Stone stands near the altar with a small box containing the bronze star. 20 men from the company form up in 2 lines. Marsh stands in front, at attention, staring at a point somewhere beyond Stone's shoulder. The citation takes less than 2 minutes to read. Stone's voice is steady and formal. For heroic achievement in connection with military operations against the enemy on December 11, 1944, near Noville, Belgium, Private First Class Leonard Marsh displayed extraordinary valor when he rescued 2 wounded soldiers from a burning vehicle while under direct enemy fire. The words sound disconnected from reality, from what actually happened. Marsh feels like he's listening to someone describe a completely different event, a fictional version where motives were pure and actions were calculated, and courage was something more than just paralyzed terror that temporarily forgot how to run away. Stone pins the medal on Marsh's uniform, shakes his hand, says, "Well done, soldier," with genuine pride in his voice. The other men applaud. Not loudly, sound discipline is still important, but enough to show respect. Marsh mumbles, "Thank you, sir," and returns to his position in the formation. The ceremony ends. The company disperses back to their positions. Within minutes, the bronze star becomes just another piece of metal on his chest, weighing slightly more than the cloth it's pinned to. But something has changed. Marsh can feel it in the way men look at him now. The respect in their eyes wasn't there before. The assumption that he's somehow different, better, more capable of handling the impossible situations combat creates. They've elevated him from soldier to symbol, from participant to example. That afternoon, Lieutenant Thomas Hart calls Marsh to his command post. Hart is young for an officer, 24, maybe 25, but he's been with the division since Normandy and survived long enough to learn how to keep men alive. He gestures for Marsh to sit on an empty ammunition crate. "How are you holding up?" Hart asked. "Fine, sir." That's what everyone says, usually right before they crack. Hart lights a cigarette and offers one to Marsh, who declines. "I'm not trying to pry. I'm asking because I need you functional. You're good at your job. I don't want to lose you to whatever's eating at you." Marsh considers lying, saying he's fine and dismissing Hart's concerns, but something about the lieutenant's directness makes him hesitate. Hart doesn't seem interested in playing the role of inspirational officer. He seems genuinely curious about what's wrong. "I didn't do anything special," Marsh says finally. "That half-track incident, everyone's acting like it was some great act of heroism, but it wasn't. I just couldn't let them burn." "So? So that's not heroism. That's just being human." Hart exhales smoke slowly. "You know what I think? I think you're right. It wasn't heroism. It was just being human. But being human under fire, when every instinct tells you to save yourself, that's what we call courage. Not because it's special, because it's rare. Doesn't feel rare, feels obvious. To you, maybe, but I've seen plenty of men freeze when things go wrong. Seen them make the smart tactical decision to stay in cover while others die. Can't fault them for it. Survival is the priority. But you didn't make the smart decision. You made the hard one. That's worth recognizing." Marsh shakes his head. "I'm not comfortable being used as an example." "Nobody is, but that's not your choice anymore. Captain Stone needed a morale boost. The men needed to see that individual actions still matter. You gave them that, whether you wanted to or not. And what happens when I fail? When I make the wrong call and get someone killed? Everyone's going to remember the hero who screwed up." Hart studies him for a long moment. "You're worried about living up to an image you never wanted." "Yes, sir." "Then don't try. Do your job, follow orders, keep your head down. The image will eventually fade. Something else will capture everyone's attention. War doesn't let anything stay important for long." It's practical advice, realistic advice, but it doesn't address the deeper problem, the gap between what Marsh knows about himself and what everyone else believes. That gap is growing. Every time someone mentions the Bronze Star, every time he catches another soldier looking at him with respect, the gap widens a little more. He leaves Hart's command post and returns to his position. The platoon is dug in along a tree line overlooking open fields to the east. German positions are visible about 600 yards away, too close for comfort, but too far for effective small arms fire. Artillery and mortars do most of the killing at this distance. Corporal Bennett is sharing a foxhole with Private Eddie Novak, a replacement who arrived 2 weeks ago and still looks terrified every time shells fall nearby. Bennett waves Marsh over. "How'd it go with Hart?" Bennett asked. "He thinks I'm overthinking things." "He's probably right. You got a habit of that." Marsh climbs into the foxhole next to them. The ground is frozen solid. Digging positions takes hours of work with picks and shovels. His hands are still blistered from yesterday's shift, reinforcing the defensive line. "Can I ask you something?" Novak says quietly. He's 19 years old, red hair and freckles. Looks like he should be in high school, not combat. "Sure," Marsh replies. "What's it like pulling someone from a burning vehicle? I mean, how did you make yourself do it?" The question catches Marsh off guard. Novak is looking at him with genuine curiosity. Not admiration exactly, but something close to it. The kid wants to know how to be brave, wants to know if there's a trick or technique he can learn. "I didn't make myself do anything," Marsh says. "I just moved, didn't think about it. The screaming was worse than the bullets." "But weren't you scared?" "Terrified. Still am." Novak seems disappointed by this answer, like he expected some profound wisdom about overcoming fear, some secret that separates heroes from everyone else. But Marsh doesn't have any secrets, just the same fear everyone feels, sometimes briefly overridden by other impulses. "You'll figure it out," Marsh says, trying to be encouraging. "Combat isn't about being fearless, it's about functioning while you're afraid. You'll get used to it." "I don't think I will," Novak says. "I think every time is going to feel like the first time." Marsh doesn't contradict him, because Novak might be right. Some people never get used to combat, never develop the emotional numbness that makes killing feel routine. Maybe that's better. Maybe staying terrified means staying human. The afternoon passes slowly. Nothing happens except the usual sporadic artillery fire and occasional sniper shots. Marsh pulls watch for 2 hours, scanning the German positions through binoculars, sees movement but nothing organized enough to indicate an attack. At dusk, Lieutenant Hart circulates through the platoon positions with new orders. "Patrol tonight. 4-man team, reconnaissance mission toward the German lines to determine enemy strength and intentions. Volunteers preferred, but if necessary, Hart will assign personnel." Marsh knows he's going immediately. Partly because he's one of the more experienced soldiers in the platoon, partly because refusing would look bad after just receiving the Bronze Star. Hart confirms it with a slight nod. "You, Bennett, Novak, and Sergeant Kowalski. Move out at 2200 hours. Stay low, stay quiet, and don't engage unless absolutely necessary. We need information, not contact." The patrol assembles after dark. Sergeant Paul Kowalski is 32 years old, a pre-war soldier who jumped into Normandy as a corporal and got promoted after most of the NCOs in his company were killed or wounded. He's steady and competent, doesn't say much, but always knows what needs to be done. They blacken their faces with dirt and check their weapons one last time. Marsh carries his M1 Garand with 5 8-round clips in his ammunition pouches. Bennett has a Thompson submachine gun. Novak has another M1. Kowalski carries a grease gun and a pair of binoculars. The patrol moves out in single file. Kowalski leads. Marsh follows second. Bennett third. Novak brings up the rear. They cross the frozen field slowly, using available cover, small rises in the ground, scattered trees, old farm equipment left behind when the civilians fled. The temperature is below zero. Their breath creates vapor clouds that hang in the still air. Every sound seems magnified. The crunch of snow under boots, the metallic click of equipment shifting, Marsh's heart pounding in his chest, loud enough to seem audible. They cover 200 yards in 30 minutes. The German positions are still 400 yards ahead. Kowalski holds up a hand, signaling stop. Everyone drops flat in the snow. Marsh can see movement ahead. Silhouettes against the darker background. 3, maybe 4 soldiers. Kowalski gestures to a small depression in the ground to the left. Word spreads faster than Marsh expected. By midday, everyone in the company knows about the patrol, about the German soldier, about Marsh's refusal to kill. The story gets simplified and distorted as it passes from person to person, until the basic facts are buried under layers of interpretation and judgment. Some men say he froze, lost his nerve at the critical moment. The Bronze Star hero revealed as a coward when real courage was required. They avoid making eye contact with him now, treat him like a contaminant that might spread if they get too close. Others say he's crazy, combat fatigue, shell shock, the stress of 3 weeks under siege finally breaking through whatever psychological barriers kept him functional. They look at him with pity, like he's already dead and just doesn't know it yet. A few say he did the right thing, that killing an unarmed, unsuspecting enemy wasn't combat, it was assassination, that maintaining some moral boundary, however arbitrary, is what separates soldiers from murderers. They are mostly the newer replacements, the ones who haven't been fighting long enough to understand that war doesn't care about moral boundaries. But all of them, regardless of opinion, treat him differently now. The respect that came with the Bronze Star evaporated overnight. He's no longer the hero who saved 2 men from a burning half-track. He's the soldier who can't be trusted when killing is required. Corporal Bennett tries to be supportive in his own way. "It'll blow over," he says during a break in the fighting. "Something else will happen. Someone will fuck up worse than you. They'll forget about it." "Maybe," Marsh says, but he doesn't believe it, because the incident with the German soldier revealed something fundamental about who he is, about the limits of what he's willing to do. And once that's revealed, it can't be hidden again. Lieutenant Hart assigns him to defensive positions rather than patrols, keeps him away from situations where split-second decisions about killing might be required. It's a practical solution to a practical problem, but it also feels like confirmation that he's no longer considered reliable. The days blur together. Artillery fire, sniper duels, constant cold that never lets up. The siege continues with no sign of relief. Supplies reach critical levels. Food is rationed to 1 K ration per day. Ammunition is conserved for confirmed targets only. Medical supplies are reserved for life-threatening injuries. Men start dying from causes other than enemy fire. Frostbite, infections, exhaustion. The cold is relentless. Temperatures drop to -10 Fahrenheit at night. Soldiers who fall asleep on watch sometimes don't wake up, just freeze to death in their foxholes, still sitting upright with their weapons ready. Marsh watches it all with increasing detachment. The gap between what's happening and his ability to process it emotionally continues widening. He performs his duties mechanically, stands watch, returns fire when fired upon, helps dig new positions. But some essential part of him has disengaged from the present moment. He thinks about the German soldier constantly, wonders if the man is still alive, wonders if he told anyone about the encounter or kept it secret out of fear of being called crazy, wonders if he understood what Marsh was trying to communicate when he let him go. On December 22nd, the weather clears briefly, and the Army Air Corps manages to drop supplies by parachute, food, ammunition, medical supplies. Not enough to end the siege, but enough to keep fighting. The men cheer when they see the C-47 transports overhead. It's the first good news in days. That night, German artillery increases. Shells fall on the town at regular intervals. The barrage is designed to prevent sleep rather than inflict casualties. Psychological warfare, breaking morale through exhaustion and constant stress. Marsh is sharing a foxhole with Private Novak. The kid is shaking, not from cold, from fear. He's been deteriorating steadily since the patrol, jumping at every sound, unable to eat. The stress is eating him alive from the inside. "I don't think I can do this much longer," Novak says quietly. "You'll do it because there's no choice," Marsh replies. "It's the truth, but not particularly comforting." "How do you handle it? The fear, the waiting, knowing that any second a shell could land in this foxhole and we both be dead?" Marsh thinks about the question, about all the ways combat breaks people, about the fact that some soldiers handle it by accepting death as inevitable, others by convincing themselves they're invincible.
still others by simply going numb to emotion entirely. "I don't know," he says finally. "I just keep moving forward, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, trying not to think too far ahead. That thing you did on patrol, letting that German go, I think I understand why you did it." "Yeah?" "Yeah, because if we stop seeing them as human, we become something worse than soldiers. We become machines, and machines don't deserve to survive. Only people do." It's surprisingly profound for a 19-year-old replacement. Marsh nods slowly. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just a coward who couldn't pull the trigger when it mattered." "You're not a coward. I've watched you fight. You do your job. You don't run. That's courage." Corporal Beddoes said the same thing. "Because it's true." They fall silent. Artillery continues falling somewhere to the north. The sound has become so constant it's almost background noise, like rain on a roof, easy to ignore until a shell lands close enough to shake the ground and remind you that death is random and proximity matters. On December 22nd, elements of Patton's Third Army finally break through the German encirclement. Tanks from the 4th Armored Division reach Bastogne's southern perimeter. The siege is broken. Relief has arrived. The 101st Airborne doesn't withdraw immediately. Instead, they're ordered to hold position and prepare for counter-offensive operations. The Germans are retreating, but still fighting, still dangerous. The war in the Ardennes isn't over yet. But something has shifted. The desperation of the past 3 weeks eases. Supply convoys can reach the town now. Hot food, winter clothing, replacement troops. The division transforms from a surrounded garrison on the verge of collapse into an offensive force preparing to pursue a defeated enemy. Marsh watches this transformation with mixed feelings. The relief is genuine. Survival was never guaranteed in Bastogne. But the return to offensive operations means more combat, more opportunities to fail, more situations where his inability to kill without question will become a liability. On January 3, 1945, the 101st Airborne launches a counterattack toward the town of Foy. The objective is to clear German positions and establish a defensive line further north. Marsh's company is assigned to the assault force. They'll move out at dawn on January 9th. Lieutenant Hart briefs the platoon on the operation. Standard attack, infantry supported by tanks, artillery preparation followed by ground assault, consolidate captured positions, and prepare for German counterattack. Nothing unusual, just another mission in a war that seems like it will never end. "Questions?" Hart asks at the end of the briefing. Nobody speaks. What questions matter at this point? They'll do what they're trained to do. Some will survive, some won't. The details are less important than the outcome. After the briefing, Hart pulls Marsh aside. "I'm putting you on point for the first assault wave," he says. Marsh nods. It's what he expected. Point position is both honor and punishment. Honor because it shows trust in a soldier's tactical abilities. Punishment because it's the most dangerous position in an attack. First to encounter enemy fire. First to hit mines or booby traps. "I need you functional," Hart continues. "Whatever happened on that patrol, whatever moral crisis you're working through, put it aside. When we move out, you're a soldier first. Everything else comes second. Clear?" "Yes, sir." "I mean it, Marsh. If you freeze at the wrong moment, people die. Not just you, everyone behind you. The whole assault depends on the point man moving forward when movement is required. Can you do that?" Marsh looks Hart in the eyes, sees the genuine concern there. Hart isn't trying to threaten him. He's trying to understand if Marsh is still capable of being the soldier the mission requires. "I'll do my job," Marsh says. It's the only promise he can make honestly. The days before the attack pass slowly. Marsh prepares his equipment, cleans his rifle until it's spotless, checks his ammunition, sharpens his bayonet. All the rituals soldiers perform before combat, trying to impose order on chaos through small acts of control. He writes a letter home, keeps it vague, can't mention where he is or what he's doing, just reassures his parents that he's alive and thinking about them, promises to come home when the war ends.
The war in Europe lasted another 4 months. Marsh survived them all. The 101st Airborne pushed into Germany, liberated concentration camps, accepted the surrender of German units that had run out of places to retreat, and on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Marsh was in Austria when it happened, standing in a village square with the rest of his company, listening to the announcement over a crackling radio. The war was over. They had won. Cheers erupted around him, men embracing, some crying with relief, the weight of 3 years of combat lifting all at once. But Marsh felt nothing, just exhaustion, and the knowledge that he'd been changed by the war in ways he still didn't fully understand. The Bronze Star was still pinned to his uniform, the corporal stripes were still on his sleeves, but the person wearing them wasn't the same person who enlisted at 18, believing war would make him a hero. He returned home in September 1945. His parents met him at the train station in Philadelphia. They hugged him, told him how proud they were, how glad they were that he survived. He smiled and said the right things, but part of him was still in Bastogne, would always be in Bastogne. The town threw a parade for returning veterans. Marsh was asked to wear his uniform and medals, to stand on a platform while the mayor gave a speech about sacrifice and heroism. He did it because refusing would hurt his parents, but he felt like an imposter, like someone playing a role in a story that had nothing to do with his actual experience. After the parade, a reporter from the local newspaper interviewed him, asked about the Bronze Star, asked him to describe the heroic action that earned it. Marsh gave the sanitized version, left out the terror and the panic and the way his body had moved without his mind's permission, just told the story everyone wanted to hear. The reporter asked if he felt like a hero. Marsh said no, said he was just a soldier who did his job. The reporter laughed and said, "That's exactly what heroes always say." The article ran the next day with the headline, "Local Hero Returns Home." Marsh kept the newspaper clipping in a drawer and never looked at it again. He enrolled in college on the GI Bill, studied engineering because it seemed practical, made friends with other veterans who had the same haunted look in their eyes. They didn't talk much about the war, didn't need to. They understood what couldn't be spoken. He met a woman named Helen in his sophomore year. She was studying to be a teacher, patient, kind, asked about his experiences, but didn't push when he was reluctant to share. They married in 1948, had 3 children, built a life that looked normal from the outside. But Marsh carried Bastogne with him always, carried the German soldier from the patrol, carried the 9 Germans he killed in the tree line, carried every impossible choice he'd made, trying to maintain some boundary between soldier and human. Decades passed, the war became history, books were written analyzing every campaign and battle, movies glorified the courage of the soldiers who fought, veterans gave speeches at schools and community centers, and Marsh watched it all with increasing distance. Because the story being told wasn't his story, the war described in books and movies was clean and comprehensible, clear heroes and villains, moral certainty and noble sacrifice, nothing like the mud and chaos and moral ambiguity of his experience. In 1984, Marsh received a letter from the Department of Defense, 40 years after the war. They were compiling records of all soldiers who had served in the Battle of the Bulge, asking veterans to submit statements about their experiences for a historical archive. Marsh thought about writing the truth, about the Bronze Star he didn't deserve, about the German soldier he couldn't kill, about the 9 Germans he killed without hesitation, about the way war turned human beings into moral philosophers, forced to make life and death decisions with incomplete information and no time to think. But he didn't write that. He wrote a short statement describing his service dates and units and battles, facts without context, history without humanity, because the truth was too complicated to fit into an archive form, too personal to share with people who wanted simple stories about heroism. His wife Helen found him one night in his study. He was holding the Bronze Star, just staring at it. She sat down next to him and waited. After a long silence, Marsh spoke. "I never wanted this. The medal, the recognition, the story about heroism. All I wanted was to survive without becoming a monster." "Did you?" Helen asked gently. "I don't know. Sometimes I think I did. Sometimes I think I became exactly what I was trying to avoid. I killed people, not because I enjoyed it, not because I hated them, just because the situation required it. What does that make me? Human, making impossible choices in impossible circumstances." That feels like a rationalization. Maybe, but it's also the truth. You were 19 years old in a war zone, expected to kill strangers while maintaining your humanity. That's not a reasonable expectation. Nobody should be judged by the choices they made in that context. Marsh put the Bronze Star back in its case. You know what's strange? The act that earned me this medal, pulling those men from the burning half-track, that was the easiest moral choice I made in the entire war. The hardest choices came after, when I had to decide who deserved to live and who deserved to die, when I had to draw lines that probably don't make sense to anyone except me. They sat together in the quiet of the study. Outside, their children were playing in the yard, the sounds of normal life continuing, the war becoming more distant with each passing year, but never quite disappearing. In 1994, 50 years after Bastogne, Marsh was invited to attend a reunion of 101st Airborne veterans. He hadn't been to one before, had always found excuses to avoid them, but Helen encouraged him to go, said it might help him find some closure. The reunion was in Tennessee. Hundreds of veterans gathered, some in their 70s now, walking with canes, wearing caps that identified their units, sharing stories about battles fought half a century ago. Marsh wandered through the crowds feeling disconnected. These men all seemed to have processed their experiences, made peace with what they'd done and seen, integrated the war into coherent life narratives. He envied them that. His war had never cohered into a narrative, just remained a collection of disconnected moments and impossible choices.